What is it exactly that makes a sound so bright, so crisp, so impossibly cheerful that it can turn a quiet room into a sunlit Italian piazza in under 3 seconds? It's not a guitar, it's not a violin, it's not a banjo, and it is definitely not a ukulele, though you'd be amazed how many people at parties will confidently call it that. This instrument can make you feel like you're sitting in a cafe in Naples in 1890. It can make you want to dance. It can make you cry, in a good way. It has 6 pairs of strings. It looks like a tiny guitar married a violin, and they had a baby with an identity crisis. Today on What Is, we're finding out what the mandolin actually is, where it came from, why it sounds the way it does, and how a small pear-shaped instrument somehow ended up in the hands of classical composers, bluegrass pickers, rock legends, and that one guy at every campfire who somehow knows 17 songs by heart. This is What Is a Mandolin? Instrument design. Let's start with the basics, because honestly, if you walked up to a mandolin and didn't know what it was, you'd have questions. And some of those questions would be, why is it so small? Why does it have double strings? And why does it look like someone took a guitar and put it in the dryer on high heat? A standard mandolin, specifically the most common type, the Neapolitan or roundback mandolin, has a body shaped something like a teardrop or a pear. It has a curved soundboard, a fretted neck, and usually 4 pairs of strings. That's 8 strings in total. They're arranged in courses, just like a 12-string guitar, but much tighter together. The strings are tuned in perfect fifths, G, D, A, E, the same intervals as a violin, just an octave lower. And here's where things get interesting, and a little counterintuitive. Because the strings are so short and so close together, the mandolin produces a bright piercing tone. But because the strings are double, 2 strings per course, wound very close together, when you pluck them, they vibrate in sync and create a shimmering chorus-like effect. It's almost like hearing 2 slightly detuned instruments playing at once. That gives the mandolin its signature sparkle. Now there are a few different types of mandolin, and they each sound a little different. The 2 most common are the A style and the F style. The A style has that classic teardrop or oval shape, elegant, simple, like a beautiful vase someone added strings to. It tends to produce a warmer, rounder tone. It's the one you'll most often see in folk and traditional music. The F style, named for its Florentine shape, which is essentially a teardrop with extra decorative cutaways and a more pointed body, has a more complex arch to its soundboard. It projects more, it cuts through a mix better, and it tends to have a brighter, more resonant sound. It also looks like a small, extremely fancy boat. There's also the mandola, which is basically a mandolin tuned down, like a viola to a violin, and the mandocello, and even the mandobass, which is exactly what it sounds like. They're all part of the mandolin family. But when people say mandolin, they're almost always referring to the 4-course, octave guitar-sized instrument we've been talking about. One more quick note before we move on. Most mandolins today are acoustic, meaning they make sound through the vibration of their soundboard. But there are also electric mandolins, and they're exactly what you'd expect. They look like small guitars, they plug into amps, and they do that whole shimmering sparkle thing, but louder. Think of it as the mandolin going to a rock concert. So that's the instrument. Now, where did it come from? Origins and development. The mandolin's story begins, as so many stories do, in Italy. Specifically, in and around Naples, in the late 1700s. That's when the mandolino, a small lute-like instrument with 4 courses of strings, started to take the shape we recognize today. But here's something that might surprise you. The mandolin isn't really from Italy. It has deep roots in even older instruments that came before it. The mandol, a small lute popular in France and Italy during the 16th and 17th centuries, is widely considered one of the mandolin's ancestors. There was also the mandolin da braccio, arm mandolin, which, you guessed it, was held like a violin. That one showed up in the 17th century and helped bridge the gap between lute traditions and the emerging stringed instrument design we know now. What the Neapolitan makers did, and this is the key part, was refine and standardize the design. By the mid-1800s, luthiers in Naples were building the roundback mandolin with 4 courses of strings, that characteristic teardrop body, and a tuned bridge. It became the template. That design crossed the Atlantic and became the American mandolin tradition, largely thanks to one man, Orville Gibson. Orville Gibson was a luthier in Kalamazoo, Michigan in the late 1800s. He started building instruments with arched tops and backs, something previously reserved for violins, and the result was louder, more resonant, and a lot more responsive than the European imports. Gibson founded the Gibson Mandolin Guitar Manufacturing Company in 1902, and within a few years, they'd essentially cornered the American mandolin market. Gibson's instruments, especially the F model, became the gold standard, and their influence is still felt today. If you pick up an F-style mandolin, you're holding a design that is well over a century old, with roots going back even further. That's remarkable when you think about it. The mandolin essentially reached its classic form before the telephone was even widely used. Now here's where it gets really interesting. In the early 1900s, the mandolin was enormously popular in the United States. Mandolin orchestras were a thing. Full ensembles with mandolins, mandolas, mandocellos, and guitars, playing arrangements of classical pieces, popular songs, and original compositions. There were dozens of recorded mandolin orchestras. It was a genuine cultural phenomenon. Then, around the 1920s and 30s, the mandolin's popularity in mainstream American music began to decline. Jazz got bigger, the guitar rose to dominance, and the mandolin, for a while, became something of a novelty. But it found new homes. And that's where things get exciting. If you are enjoying this exploration of the mandolin, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more musical explorations and more. Back to the mandolin, and next let's look at prominent uses in music and styles. The mandolin is one of those rare instruments that doesn't just belong to one genre, it belongs to many. And honestly, that's part of what makes it so special. Let's start with classical music. The mandolin has been a legitimate classical instrument since the late 18th century. Vivaldi wrote for it. Beethoven was sent a mandolin and wrote a sonata for it, the Mandolin Sonata in C minor, WOO 43, because apparently a wealthy patron asked him to, and he complained in a letter that the mandolin was, quote, not worth a rap. But he wrote the piece anyway, and it's actually lovely. In the 20th century, composers like Igor Stravinsky, John Cage, and Leo Brouwer all wrote for the mandolin, expanding its technical range and bringing it into the avant-garde. The instrument that was once dismissed as a casual social instrument turned out to have serious musical depth. Now, and this is where things get really fun, let's talk about bluegrass. If you've ever heard bluegrass music, you've almost certainly heard a mandolin. It's absolutely fundamental to the genre. The fast-driving tremolo, that rapid-fire picking where you barely lift your fingers from the strings, is one of the most recognizable sounds in all of American music. Bill Monroe, who is literally called the father of bluegrass, played mandolin. So did David Grisman, Sam Bush, Mike Compton, and dozens of others. The mandolin in bluegrass isn't just an accompaniment instrument, it's a lead voice. It dances, it drives, it syncopates, it swings. And that's the thing about the mandolin. It swings. It has a natural bouncy rhythm that makes you want to tap your foot, clap your hands, and, if you're anything like me, attempt to play along despite having no musical ability whatsoever. It's deeply infectious. Moving into folk and Americana, the mandolin is everywhere. It's been a fixture of American folk music since the early 1900s, appearing in string bands, old-time groups, and singer-songwriter setups. Artists like John Hartford, Greg Allman, and more recently Rhiannon Giddens have used the mandolin to add texture, warmth, and a touch of old-world charm to modern music. And then there's rock and pop. the mandolin has shown up in rock music more often than you might think. The Beatles used it, George Harrison played a mandolin on The Fool, and John Lennon played one on Glass Onion. Led Zeppelin featured it on The Battle of Evermore, played by Sandy Denny. Radiohead used it, Bon Iver, The Flaming Lips. Even Kurt Cobain, yes, that Kurt Cobain, played a mandolin on the Nirvana track, Lake of Fire. It pops up in pop music too. Taylor Swift has used mandolin. The Strokes. It's that instrument that can feel at home in an arena rock anthem and a quiet, intimate folk ballad. It adapts, it blends, it doesn't demand attention, but it absolutely commands it when it shows up. And that's not even the full picture. There's Celtic and Irish folk music, where the mandolin, sometimes called the Irish mandolin, brings a bright, danceable energy to jigs and reels. There's Brazilian music, where it appears in choro and MPB. There's Mediterranean and Middle Eastern music, and even Japanese folk traditions that have incorporated the instrument. The mandolin is, frankly, a musical chameleon. It doesn't argue with other styles, it complements them. Famous players. There have been extraordinary mandolin players in just about every era and genre. Let's talk about a few of the ones who really shaped the instrument's legacy. First, Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass. His fast, precise, driving playing defined what the mandolin could do in a bluegrass context. He played a Gibson F5, and his style, full of triplet-based runs, cross-picking, and relentless rhythm, became the blueprint. Every bluegrass mandolin player today is in some way playing in Bill Monroe's language. Next, David Grisman, known to his fans as Dog. Grisman essentially created a whole genre, dog music, a blend of bluegrass, jazz, classical, and swing. His playing is incredibly clean, incredibly precise, and incredibly musical. He recorded extensively as a solo artist, and with his band, the Dog Band, and his influence on modern stringed instrument playing, not just mandolin, is enormous. And then there's Sam Bush, often called the Mandolin Monkey. If you've never seen Sam Bush play live, do yourself a favor and look him up. His energy is absolutely infectious. He's a bluegrass player, but he brings elements of rock, blues, and jazz into his playing. He's worked with everyone from Emmylou Harris to John Paul Jones to Fish. He's one of those musicians who makes you rethink what's possible on an instrument. In the classical world, there's Ugo Orlandi, one of the preeminent classical mandolin players of the 20th century, known for his beautiful tone and expressive playing, and Mauro Sguassera and Friedrich T.H. Wolf, all part of a lineage of classical mandolinists who kept the instrument alive in the concert hall when it had largely faded from popular attention. In more modern times, players like Chris Thiele, who, between his work with Nickel Creek, Punch Brothers, and Brad Mehldau, has basically reimagined what a mandolin can do in contemporary music, have taken the instrument into entirely new territory. Thiele plays jazz, bluegrass, and experimental music with equal fluency. He's arguably the most technically advanced mandolin player alive, and he's constantly pushing the instrument forward. And let's not forget the non-musicians, the people who hear a mandolin for the first time and suddenly want to learn. That impulse, that moment where a sound hits you and makes you think, I need to know how to do that. That's part of what makes this instrument so special. Influence and future. So, what does the future hold for the mandolin? Is it a relic, a niche instrument, or is it something more? Here's what I think. The mandolin has survived wars, musical trends, instrument fads, and the rise and fall of entire genres. It's been written off more than once, and every time it finds its way back into the hands of musicians who see something in it that no other instrument can offer. The mandolin occupies a unique sonic space. It's brighter than a guitar. It's warmer than a violin. It's more percussive than either. It cuts through a mix without overwhelming it. And, perhaps most importantly, it makes people feel something. That bright, shimmering, impossibly cheerful sound has a way of cutting through gloom. In recent years, the mandolin has been experiencing something of a renaissance. Thanks to artists like Chris Thile, Rhiannon Giddens, and Sierra Hull, younger audiences are discovering it. It's showing up in indie folk, Americana, and even some electronic and experimental contexts. Luthiers are building better mandolins than ever, combining traditional craftsmanship with modern acoustics. There's also a growing community of players online, tutorials, covers, jam sessions, that is keeping the instrument accessible. You don't need a fancy concert hall. You don't need 100 years of training. You need 8 strings, a little patience, and a willingness to sound a little messy at first. And that's okay. Every mandolin player alive today started somewhere. The mandolin isn't just an instrument. It's a link between centuries and continents, between Neapolitan cafe culture and Kentucky bluegrass fields, between classical concert halls and campfire circles, between the past and whatever wild, unpredictable musical future we're heading toward. If you enjoyed this deep dive, and you're curious about other instruments, musical traditions, and the stories behind the sounds you love, make sure you hit subscribe and hit that bell icon. We cover all kinds of instruments, musical concepts, and the stories behind them. There's a lot more to explore, and I think you'll like what we have coming up. Now, let's get to that bonus. Before you go, here's a bonus fact that I think you'll really like. The mandolin is a member of the lute family, which means, over an enormous series of evolutionary steps, it's a distant relative of the oud, the ancient Middle Eastern instrument that gave rise to the lute, which gave rise to the guitar, which gave rise to basically every stringed instrument you can think of. So when you play a mandolin, you're holding an instrument whose family tree stretches back thousands of years, across continents and cultures, to a sound that humans have been chasing since the beginning of music itself. Not bad for something that looks like a shrunken guitar. Thanks for watching. See you next time.